So you may be asking yourself, what is special education and who belongs there? First of all, special education is specifically designed instruction to meet individual needs of a learner. But how do we know who belongs? Well, the first thing that we do is look at someone's academic aptitude. That means that we're going to use things such as IQ tests to look for memory, common knowledge, and reasoning, normed reference tests to see how does this person compare against other people who are of the same age and in the same region, diagnostic achievement tests to identify strengths and concerns, interviews so that we can get an informal perspective, observations so that we can see the person in a specific setting, and finally, informal assessments, things that have been created by teachers to help with student learning. Tests in academic and social emotional areas are used to identify student learning and behavioral needs. The ones that I just listed are a multitude of measures that can help us understand who these kiddos are. The next thing that we need to look at are students' executive functionings. Those are their metacognitive strategies. How do they regulate themselves? How do they regulate their thought processes? What happens when they attempt to perform an environment in an environment? Next, we look at that psychomotor. That is their coordination, their ability to walk, their ability to hop, skip, to cross their midline, and their fine motor skills. And finally, we look at the psychosocial. How do they respond to those things that are going on in the real world? So, let's think about it. If you review Table 2.2 on page 50 of your text, you will see all different types of delivery services and options in special education. Service delivery options refer to the type of classroom structure. The text identifies 8 different learning environments that could be selected to assist a student in learning. Each of these are considered when creating the IEP or Individual Education Plan, and only one is considered to be the least restrictive environment. That one that is identified is then chosen. So what happens? What's the process like? Well, it begins with the fact that a student is in a classroom and the teacher or the student or the parent sees that there's a problem. Once this has happened, we begin what's called the pre-referral process. The pre-referral process has to do with the general educator. That's you. You are going to observe, do a variety of tests, start looking at the student's behaviors and abilities on different tests and assignments to see what's going on with this child and are there patterns that may suggest that the student needs additional help. If you find that this child needs help, then you go to what is called a TAT team, a thought team, or a care team. These teams are made up of professionals, usually the principal or representative, special education teachers, speech pathologists, social workers, special education workers, and the general educator. You go into the room and you provide them with the information that you have gathered both formally and informally to assess and identify what the student is in need of. This group usually gives you an opportunity to identify a variety of different strategies to take back to your classroom. You then document these strategies and you see if these particular strategies are doing any good. So let's start with the first thing. You've observed a problem. The next thing, you go through some type of screening in your classroom. The third thing, you end up in pre-referral. So you go to this group, you talk about what's going on, and they give you strategies and things to try back in your classroom. Once you've tried these and documented, you know which ones of these are going to work and which ones are not. If it appears that most of the strategies that have been recommended are not being successful in the classroom, you come back to the pre-referral team and they decide to go ahead and contact parents and start the referral process. This would mean that there are formal evaluations that are done, And once the formal evaluations are done, the group gets back together again to discuss whether the child has actually made the progress that needs to be made, or whether this particular child is going to need to have an individualized education plan because they meet the definition for that diagnosis. It's a long process, and it's a hard process. It's one that frustrates many general educators. But if we do not take our time to look at these kids, see what they need, and see if we can provide them without putting special education services into place, we have a much better chance of not trying to diagnose a child that doesn't have a diagnosis. In other words, when I worked in Kansas City, Kansas, my classroom was supposed to be for children who had mental retardation. I can tell you, after working with children who had severe mental retardation, that the group of children who were diagnosed as having special needs, specifically mental retardation, probably had a learning disability, but were not mentally retarded. These were young African American children who had life experiences that got in the way of their learning when they were little. They didn't have the abilities, the coping mechanisms, the strategies, and the background knowledge to be able to generalize and problem solve. We don't want that to happen anymore. So we've made sure that we have things in place to make sure that children who have a diagnosis really do have a special need. Once these are in place, the IEP is written. That's a different video.